It's so great to have you all today. Here we are here to talk about the power of mentorship, and we're also here to talk with one of the MDs that we will have. Unfortunately, while we did schedule for Jeremy Pitt, the Activate Houston managing director, to be with us today, unfortunately, a hurricane had other news. So we definitely want to think about the people in Houston and Texas as well as they are dealing with that hurricane today. But alternatively, we do have our Activate Boston managing director here, Dan. And so today really is a conversation really to get to know them. They're the pillars of each community, and they provide the guidance, experience, unbiased direction that will allow the Activate Fellows to be at the helm of their company's trajectory with that unparalleled support. So we're going to talk to Dan today about his journey as a former entrepreneur himself, how MDs really build and lead their communities, and how this unique mentorship really adds value to the Activate Fellowship, and what's going on in the world of innovative entrepreneurship. I'll be talking to Dan and asking him questions for about 30 minutes. You're more than welcome to drop any questions that you might have, any general questions in the chat, and Rick and I will be here to assist with those. But we will have a live Q&A session at the end of this session with about the last 15 minutes, where you're then more than welcome to come off camera and off mute to ask your question to Dan and or the team. Also, lastly, I will note that we are recording this call. This call will be used internally as well as externally as we do post these videos for review on YouTube. If for any reason you do not feel comfortable showing your face or your voice, you're again more than welcome to drop that question in the chat, or you do not have to come off camera, but you're still more than welcome to answer your question live. So with that, let's talk to Dan a little bit more. So Dan, you are passionate about nurturing people and cutting edge technology. And we like to say your superpower is moving smoothly between the highly technical and the business oriented. Moreover, he is driven by a deep-seated feeling that we are all in this together. As he says, at every scale, from all of humanity, all the way down to any team that I'm on. He brings broad experience with high impact startups to Activate. He's been a startup co-founder, worked in big corporations interacting with startups, and led teams at various growth stages. Most recently, Dan is now the managing director at Activate Boston. So Dan, great to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add any more about your bio before we get started with the questions?
I think the last thing I'd add is just that I've been a friend of Activate for a long time, and it's really been a pleasure to go from someone who's been watching from the sidelines, working with Activate companies, to now having a formal role in the organization, leading one of the communities.
Good. Well, we will be talking more about how you've been a friend of Activate later on in the discussion. But to start off, how did your academic background at Princeton as well as Harvard shape your approach to entrepreneurship and innovation? And you eventually went on to work and support startup companies after graduating with your PhD. What were some of the early challenges that you faced?
Got it. Yeah. So let me start with my academic background, and then we can take things from there. The way that really contributed to my life as an entrepreneur and as someone who works with startups is initially kind of negatively, to be honest, because it was a pretty privileged background. And it took me a while as an individual and as a founder to get past that privilege and really to see all of the different kinds of people it takes to make a successful team at really every scale and every stage of startup life. And I was very lucky after graduate school to have the opportunity to work outside the US. So my first job as a PhD in material science, my expertise at that point was in solar energy, was to work for a big solar company in South Korea, being the interface person between them and startup companies all over the world. And not only did I get to see a great diversity of companies, of founders, I also was in a position where I was not in the dominant culture. And I had to really learn to live with and cope with being different than most of my colleagues. And that was a really formative experience for me that I think helped me develop in a hurry a lot of empathy for folks who don't necessarily see themselves when they look around at the space that they'd like to do work in. And so that early experience after my PhD, working with entrepreneurs while also being in a really new and uncomfortable environment, was quite formative.
Good to know. Good to know. Thanks for that. So my next question is actually about kind of how you came about or found out about Activate. So we know that you've been around Activate and the Activate Fellows well before you became the managing director for Boston. For example, you did work with Vince Romanian of cohort 2017 on some early proposals for what would be now become Gradient, or a company rethinking air conditioning, and an Activate Fellow success story as well. So how have you seen the organization change for startup companies over the years?
Yeah, thinking about how Activate has supported startup companies over the years and my years of experience with Activate, there's a couple of things I'd highlight. The first is that when I was co-founding my startup Volute, which was making fuel tanks for natural gas and hydrogen cars, that company and technology came out of a place called Other Lab, which is an independent research lab in San Francisco. And I was starting that company in 2014, just as Activate was getting started. And the clean tech, climate tech community in San Francisco at that time was very close knit because there just weren't that many people working on it at that stage. And so Elon Gurr, who was founding Activate, came by to hang out and talk with us as he was talking through his transition from being an RPE program director to starting the organization that first became Cyclotron Road and then became Activate. So I had a lot of early contact with him in those initial discussions about what this organization was going to be, how he wanted it to look. And I will say, at that time, he was really focused on the transition from government grant-funded research to entrepreneurship or to commercialization. And I appreciate that one thing that has happened to Activate over the intervening years is that the door is much more open to people coming to entrepreneurship from all sorts of inventive backgrounds. That it's not necessarily important that you be doing grant-funded research ahead of time. It's just that, like, have you invented something that's potentially high impact? Are you the person who should take it to market? Great, apply to Activate. And I appreciate that the focus has shifted from the path that people came from to the impact that they could have on the world.
I think that is just a perfect segue into what you've mentioned as one of your organizing principles is that you have an infinite debt to pay it forward. And I feel like through this position a little bit, or through your kind of career trajectory, as you've mentioned, has just been, in a sense, just continuing or trying to pay it forward as you can. So what other ways do you like to do that besides your everyday job as managing director?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something I always challenge myself to do too. One thing that I try to do is never turn away an entrepreneur if I can avoid it. If there's someone where I can make an introduction for them or have like a single advisory call to try to move the needle for somebody who's trying to start a company, there were a lot of people who helped me out early in my entrepreneurial career who didn't have to do that. And some of them are still mentors of mine to this day. And I think about the way that they shaped my experience as an example that I want to set for the next generation of people. When I talk specifically to folks who are in climate tech, which is the area that I'm most comfortable in as an entrepreneur, I talk about it as a friend group, that people help each other. And I think this extends to a lot of high impact startups because it's the right thing to do. And because we're all in this together. Essentially, since nobody came to climate tech to get rich quick, right? The finance folks, right? People who are making software startups specifically because they see that as a financial path, a financial choice. I can imagine those people having more competition at the core of their ethos, although that's an assumption. I'm not that familiar with that community. In climate tech, nobody came there because they thought it was the path to personal wealth, at least not as the number one fastest way to do that. They're there because they believe in the impact. They may also have personal financial goals, but they're alongside that impact. And that just means that everybody is predisposed to help each other. And if you go into your interactions with other entrepreneurs, other people into the community with that in mind, you're going to get a lot of positivity out of it. And so how does that relate to my desire to pay it forward? At this point, I am trying to curate that overall community here in Boston so people are really solid to each other. Like I now have this really privileged role where I'm able to be an anchor point in this ecosystem with the community we build at Activate, the events we hold, the way our fellows interact with the world, to say, we can all help each other. We are all on the same team. Let's not be cutthroat and competitive, but instead, let's see how we can all lift each other up.
I love I love how you just kind of turned it and are definitely leveraging your position at Activate and your position in the community to really leverage and bring other people along. I love that. Kind of moving along with kind of how you think as a managing director. I think you've already started kind of on those key components and benefits of building a strong and supportive community for entrepreneurs at Activate. It, can you talk a little bit more about maybe other key components or benefits at your community in Boston specifically, or more Activate communities writ large? But then also, uniquely, how do you leverage your past experiences to provide that guidance and support to your fellows?
Sure. So when I think about the benefits of being part of an Activate community in general, and the Boston community in particular, two big ones really stand out. The first is the community itself, the community of fellows and alumni, where entrepreneurship is very lonely. I was very lucky to be at Other Lab, part of a small community of entrepreneurs doing hard things. Most entrepreneurs I know who've been working on high impact startups have done it in a very lonely way. And so to be given a community of 10 fellows in your cohort, 10 fellows in the cohort 1 year ahead of you, a huge group of alumni to draw from, to say, you're not alone. We have had this experience before. There are people you can ask. That's one of the main benefits of the Activate Fellowship. And when I ask our fellows in Boston at the end of their time with us, what was the biggest deal? That ranks ahead of the money almost every time. The second big thing that I would highlight is how customized and ongoing the support is. That between the one-on-one meetings with me, the quarterly meetings, the yearly reflections, programming, we see each of our fellows a lot and are delivering highly tailored support to them. It's not just like being a board member or being a typical advisor. We're digging in and doing work alongside our fellows. Right? It's not just, hey, can I get your advice on something? My response to that is going to be, no, send me that spreadsheet. Let's spend some time in it. And being able to have such high context on each of our fellows and each of their companies really lets us do something that short accelerators, investors, other programs can't do.
Great. And are there any other unique perspectives that you bring to the Activate Fellowship based on your extensive experience in the hard tech sector?
Yeah. So I've had a lucky career in hard tech. I've built a bootstrapped startup in natural gas and hydrogen storage. And I was lucky enough to sell that company. And then after that, I've worked at 2 growth stage startups, one in 3D printing and one in AI. The 3D printing company was hundreds of people around Series D financing. And then the AI company, it was AI hardware. And I was there at a time where we grew from 50 people to over 100 people. So I saw more than a doubling in that company and had an executive role through that. And being able to have seen growth in startups from really 3 people to over 100 people, and to have at least a snapshot of what life looks like at 500 people means I'm able to talk to our fellows about what life looks like at a lot of different scales. And what does it mean to raise a pre-seed round, but also what does it mean to raise a Series B round? So I think a special benefit I bring in as a person to the fellowship is just that breadth of experience across lots of different company stages.
I think that it definitely helps for sure. It definitely adds much value. So just to switch gears a little bit to talk about entrepreneurship kind of in general, what are the biggest opportunities and challenges, in your opinion, that are facing entrepreneurs in the hard tech space today?
One of the really cool opportunities I'm seeing is that there are so many industries that have these deep-seated problems that can be solved by hard tech entrepreneurship. So I am seeing more and more companies following the pattern of there is this detailed, complicated problem inside a giant industry X, where it's like oil refining, steel making, plastics making, the automobile industry, paper making, right? The big industry, lots of emissions, lots of impacts, highly complicated, but I can make a technical intervention in this specific spot and transform how it operates. And I'm really enjoying that pattern. I think it's very positive because it connects to how things are really done in the world, is connected very closely to actual economic opportunity, and also gives the technology a natural home. It's a problems first approach as opposed to hammer looking for a nail approach. And I think the thing that is the opportunity for hard tech entrepreneurs is I'm seeing more and more willingness from these established industries to talk to people about how they do things. There's an understanding that entrepreneurs can bring technical solutions. So folks at trade shows are very open. My fellows are able to get tours of things in a way that I think would have been very hard for me even 5 or 10 years ago. Challenge-wise, I think interest rates are going to be a challenge for hard tech entrepreneurs. It is a slow path to building a business. It's slower than building a software business or in a lot of cases, a pure consumer business. The reward at the end is potentially much larger because if you do build the next big serious industrial company, there's very few businesses that are as stable and as rewarding as that and as impactful. But we have seen a little bit lately more competition for the same investor dollars. We've certainly seen lower company valuations at the early stages. So our founders are getting diluted more. It's not stopping folks from founding companies and being successful. And most of our Activate fellows who go out to raise money are successfully doing that. But it's no longer the case that you can walk off your front steps and trip over $2 million. Like you really do have to plan your fundraise and work for it, know what you're going to do with the money, have your list of investors ready to go. And it's favoring the prepared and is favoring people who really have quality companies, which is actually, like in the long run, probably good for Activate fellows.
Oh, and you just touched on this so much. I just have to bring this question back because of just how you kind of ended that question. But you talked a lot about how the mentorship at Activate really sets and just supports the Activate fellows through different stages. How do you think that that differs, and how does it actually differ from other entrepreneurial support programs that you've encountered or know about?
Yeah. So this is an area where I want to spend a little bit of time. Activate, we're really different from any other entrepreneurial support program. The first way we're really different is we follow the person and we support the person. I have had fellows leave their company and stay at the fellowship. I have had fellows execute complete technology pivots, break up with co-founders. Any number of crises happen, we stick with you. That is our unique benefit as a nonprofit that doesn't take equity. As soon as someone takes equity in your company, they value the company over you. And when push comes to shove, they'll choose the company because that's where their financial incentive is. We want to be the person in the lives of our fellows who really supports them and puts the company second. So that's our first big differentiator. The second is spending 2 years with someone is a really long time. And 2 years of high contact means we get a lot of context and we can reach in and really partner on things in a way that shorter accelerators, larger accelerators, or lighter touch things can't do. So I spoke a little bit about that before, but I want to highlight it here too. Right? Contrast, for example, Y Combinator, which is about bringing in a lot of people, giving them a brand, giving them access to network, and giving them some money, and saying, okay, go take advantage of these resources. Good luck, with a little bit of coaching. Our approach is much more hands-on and tailored, where it's not geared toward the people who best take advantage of the cookie cutter resources we provide every time, but instead we spend a lot of time on selections to try to pick people who we can help, and then we try to help the heck out of those people every way we can.
I think that's a great way to put it. We pick the people that we want to help and we help the heck out of them. I love that. Quotable straight from Dan. Lastly, I want to finish this up with some advice and some, I guess, visionary thinking. First, I'll start with the visionary thinking. How do you envision the role of technology evolving and addressing global sustainability challenges over the next decade? Maybe even further if you want to go farther out. And lastly, what is some advice that you want to give to our audience who are looking to make an impact to solve the world's most complex problems and help with global sustainability challenges?
When I think about the role of technology evolving, one of the things I really hope for is I would love to see technology come back and be a catalyst for more societal optimism. We have so many amazing technologies being developed and produced, and yet in a lot of ways, I feel that the mood in the United States is much more pessimistic towards technology than it's been in the past. And I, for one, am ready for that pendulum to swing. And when I spend time with Activate fellows, all I get is hope and optimism. Every one of my interactions with one of our fellows, and honestly with most of our applicants, is, wow, that's amazing. I'm so glad that exists. It makes me hopeful for the future. So when I think about the role of technology in society changing, I think we could really change the whole mood of the United States by doing what we're doing. And that would be really cool. In terms of how it would impact everyday lives, I think more and more biotechnology is coming out there. And maybe that's my biased perspective from Boston, but boy, there are a lot of cool things that biology is doing that it wasn't doing even 5 years ago. And fads come and go, but the fundamental technologies around chemistry, materials, bio, like that progress is real. And so like, the AI boom will come and it will pass, and there will be some valuable companies made, and the hype will move on to another thing. But that steady march of our core technical capabilities will keep going. And then we'll look back, I forget whose quote this is, but the quote is, people underestimate progress on a 5-year scale. Oh, sorry. People overestimate progress on a 5-year scale and underestimate it on a 10-year scale, I think is how the quote goes. It's something like that. But yeah, like I'm really excited for where we'll be in 10 years. I think people are underestimating how big a change materials, chemistry, biology are going to create for the world in that time scale. And then in terms of advice for our audience, one of the big things I would say is it's okay to be technically lonely. Like I talked about loneliness of like personal loneliness of being an entrepreneur is something to try to solve by finding a community. Maybe Activate's that community, maybe we're not. But if you can put a community around yourself, definitely do. Technical loneliness, though, is something I'm explicitly looking for in our applications. Are you out doing deep, interesting technical work away from fads, away from what happens to be popular in that moment? That's where the best stuff usually is, where someone is really committed to a good idea and the rest of the world just hasn't caught on yet. because they're too far ahead of the curve.
I love that. Well, thank you so, so much, Dan, for talking with me through the past 30 minutes on just all of these different topics. So many gems, so many quotable moments. So thank you. Round of applause for Dan. So now we will jump into, again, our Q&A. And I will start us off with Derek, who jumped in the chat and asked a question for Dan. We'll kick it off there, but just a couple of housekeeping notes as we get started with the Q&A. Again, you can press the reaction tab at the bottom of your screen and then press the raise hand feature to jump in the queue for your hand to be raised. Alternatively, you can always drop your question in the chat and we will get to those as well. But kicking it off with Derek's question in the chat, he said, I'm sure this may be discussed later, but a related question to feeling lonely and having a cohort. So I think that this touches perfect on your advice. But it says, Derek asks, how did you experience leadership growth? Make sure it works.
Yeah, so the question is, how did I experience leadership growth? I would say in a lot of different ways. Formally, informally, like on the job, learning from mentors, occasionally from books. I, for one, am not the kind of person who learns a ton from leadership books. Other people do better with them. One of the actually big things for me was a class I took in my senior year of college, which was in the theater department. I started college thinking I would be a theater major. I switched over to physics and material science, but I kept taking theater classes. And I took a class on storytelling. And spending a term on storytelling, boy, has that helped along the way. One of the things we really focus on in the fellowship is storytelling. But being able to think in terms of those narratives and see how people frame their lives around narratives, frame their self-conceptions around narratives, how to tell the story of a company or of a technology, that has been a thread that has gone through my whole career and something that I've been able to use as a scaffold to build a lot of leadership lessons onto. So that, when I've worked with mentors, I've been able to see how they tell their own stories, how they want me to change my story. It's been a really good lens to look at career development through.
Hi, Dan. Just wanted to say thank you for that. And very interesting coming from a theater background and being able to connect with people. I think that's like a cornerstone of leadership. And, it's very smart to be able to tell a story to motivate. So thank you for that.
Yeah, happy to help. Other questions?
Yeah, feel free to jump in again with the reaction tab, or more than welcome to jump in to the chat as well with a question. Oh, wait, I saw a hand and it went down. More than welcome to come back and jump on and ask your question.
May I
No, I'm
jump in
sorry.
there? Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I just raised my hand, but I put it down because I'm in the storm right now. So the same storm that our gentleman is our MD at Houston is. So I'll just type my question in the chat because the connection may be unstable.
Perfect. Yeah, and we'll get to it. No worries. And stay safe.
Could I
That's-
probably
Sure.
get a question in there?
Yeah.
Dan, what sort of insight do you have in sort of navigating the valley of death in sort of scaling up technologies?
I really love how people say the valley of death as if there's only one. Like,
Yes.
your startup is like, I'll borrow a quote from Paul Graham here. Your startup is default dead until it's not, right? Like, so when I think about scaling up, right, every time you need to increase the scale of your impact, increase the scale of what you're doing, you need more resources. obviously when I say resources, like everybody should immediately think dollar signs, but you also need to attract talented people, find space, find suppliers, find customers, find equipment, like all these different things need to come together. And money alone doesn't solve all those problems. Every one of those moments is a moment where you as the leader has to scale. Or have to scale. You as the leader have to scale. And that is actually the biggest killer. When I really look back, most startups fail for what I would call like dumb reasons of like the two founders got in a fight, or they like their key champion at a customer switched jobs, or like all these things. The valley of death stuff is real, and needing to raise capital is real. However, if you come to those scaling moments, having prepared yourself to take on that next level of responsibility, having started to gather up the followers you need to do that in terms of people who might work for you, people who might advise you, people who would be your customers and your suppliers. If you show up ready and you're building the right company, getting the money is hard, but doable. It's from not actually being scaled in some way, right? Either that you as a leader are not ready, or that the company that you're building doesn't have a clear enough financial story. One of like, okay, if we give you this money, what will happen? Where the different valleys of death come from. But for me, it comes back to storytelling. It's like, okay, if I'm going to invest this money into you, what return should I expect? When? Why? Why should I believe you? And having answers to those questions is really what's going to bridge you across that valley. But those answers, in order for them to be true, mean you have to have done the right work ahead of time.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay, if we don't have another raised hand at the moment, I can jump back into the chat. The question is for the Activate Fellowship, at what stage must the startup be at when applying for it? For context, this person is a doctoral candidate graduating at the end of the year, and I-Corps is not an option for him. I can jump in on this question, Dan, unless you had any thoughts here. Happy to answer.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add before you give the detailed answer is like, I really recommend our website for this. We try to be super clear about what it takes. And as a person who, for my job selects the fellows, the website's really accurate on how we do this, what we look for and why. And then I'll pass it off to you, Kerrigan.
Definitely utilizing the website or even these webinars and utilizing us for any additional resources that we have. But for the stage that your startup must be in, you do not have to be incorporated. You can be very early stage. What I like to say is ideation phase or some initial lab results, or kind of like the earliest that will take an idea. I-Corps is also, as we do love I-Corps as a kind of feeder program for us into the fellowship, kind of that initial customer discovery and initial beginnings to your company, and kind of to
Did we lose Kerrigan? Oh, there she is.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi went out. Sorry for that. I don't know. It just quit out on me. That was pretty much me. I don't know how much you all heard, or if you're cut out early, but I-Corps is great, but definitely not needed to apply or be accepted into the program. There are also a ton of other resources, like our past webinars, our website, as well as our Learn module, or just a couple of additional resources that will help you kind of get that frame of thinking early on. And Rick just dropped in the FAQ as well. Are there any other questions? I'll take maybe one or two other questions and then we'll close us out. Jared, go ahead.
Yeah, for Dan, you said you tailor the sort of programming and mentoring for every fellow, but I was just wondering if there is certain universal skills that most Activate fellows are lacking, kind of something that isn't as tailored, something that pretty much everybody that comes through the fellowship has to sort of learn or grow through to kind of hit the finish line that you do for everybody.
The way we think about it as Activate is we want to bring everybody up to a common baseline once they start the fellowship. So we run a program called Elements of Entrepreneurship in that first summer, where all the different core skills you need to run a startup are covered. And each individual may have some, but not all of them. But our goal is to really cross all of them. And the way we do that is with a flipped classroom model. So the fellows see video content, read documents during the week, and then once a week, we gather together for a little bit more than an hour of discussion on the topics that were covered that week. And we're going to cover things like building your team, finding advisors, also fundraising, finance, techno-economic analysis. And like I said, the goal is common baseline. We also think about this in terms of mindsets and skills. And a lot of these have to do with the transition from academia to entrepreneurship. And I would not say it's universal because not all of our fellows come from academia, but a lot of them have in common the need to make that mind shift from I was an academic to now I'm running a business. But that's something we're very used to helping with.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. Any other, Garrett?
Hi, another question. How important is it to have, you mentioned community, but I went from being in Boston area to Amherst, and kind of my home is UMass Amherst, that area, but there's not a lot of material science, at least in battery. That's what I come from, in that area. And I'd like to really stay rooted in Western Mass because I like the values in the area. But so how important is it to have a location that is conducive to growth, or is it possible that you could look for somebody who's looking to establish that as a new area?
Yeah. So one of the things we really care about at Activate is making sure the business you're building is consistent with your goals and values. That's one of the things we really mean with tailored support. So if one of the things you value is to stay in Western Massachusetts, that's the thing we'd support you in doing. I will say you will not be the first team we have supported in Western Massachusetts. There are several current fellows who have their businesses there. I think
Right. Yeah, I'm familiar with Florent and I've talked with those folks.
Yeah, and they're not the only ones. And
okay.
What I would say is that you will be making trade-offs. There's a reason the hubs are the hubs. And so you will likely, not guaranteed, but likely have a slower growing business. You will, but on the other hand, that business will probably be more like the thing that you want. But if you want to know if it's possible, yeah, it's possible.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
And with that, thank you to all of those who asked questions. At this time, I'm going to just drop a little bit more information for you all before we close out for this webinar. Sorry, I'm just going to share my screen at once. So just a little bit of general information for you all. So again, the cohort 2025 timeline is set and available on the website. So our applications will be opening up on September 4th and closing on October 15th. So super excited to be garnering up the engagement and the webinars as we look forward and prepare for this October 4th opening. Once applications close, we immediately get started on our selection process as we go through an external and internal review over the winter. We do have video interviews in January, which will be the first instance in which you would get to meet your community team. From there, we go into our favorite time of the year, our finalist week, in which about 100 or so finalists will be participating in an open pitch discussion with the Activate ecosystem, where they'll deliver that virtual pitch. And then our fellows are selected in April for the fellowship and the retreat, which is kind of the opening welcome into the fellowship in June. Trying to find my mouse. There you are. And lastly, is to stay engaged with us. So we do have job opportunities if you wanted to see any of those number of roles, but also if you have not signed up for communications for our upcoming application cycle in September, please do so at activate.org/apply. We are also more than welcome for any questions that you might not have gotten answered today or any other questions that come up. You're more than welcome to email the team at apply@activate.org at any time. We will again be gearing up for September with plenty more events, more panel discussions, opportunities for you to meet more of the team, as well as our new cohort of Activate Fellows. You can sign up and RSVP for additional events at activate.org/events. And lastly, you can watch all of our past webinars on our channel on our YouTube channel. And for upcoming events, we'll be learning more about the Activate Fellowship, which is a general recruitment webinar on Wednesday. On the 19th, we'll be supporting early stage founders with Activate. So if you have any professors or kind of academic professors or anybody kind of in your ecosystem who might want to learn how to support you all even further as you're thinking about applying, you can please send them to that webinar. And then lastly, on the 24th, we'll be talking to some 2024 fellows on why they chose entrepreneurship and why they chose it now. Lastly, I do have Joshua as I unshare my screen, and thank you all for your time today. There is a short poll that Joshua is going to be dropping the link for. If you could just answer those couple of questions, we would really, really appreciate it. But again, we thank you for your time today. We hope to see you at the next webinar. And again, last shout out and thanks to Dan for jumping in and talking and speaking with us today.